Dr. Willis, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm so excited for this conversation. It's something near and dear to my heart. And as we were talking earlier, we're both cycle breakers. And so we're here to encourage anybody else who's listening to this who wants to break the cycle or is in the process of that. It's an ongoing project, it's something you always have to work at. But if any listeners are not familiar with your work, can you give us an intro and share a bit about your journey and your mission behind your work as a family empowerment coach and psychologist? I love that, family empowerment coach.
Yes, yes. First of all, Angela, I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this interview. So thank you for having me. I love
Oh,
this
thank you.
topic and I'm so excited to speak with you and your audience. So thank you. I am Dr. Lynetta Willis. As Angela just said, I'm a family empowerment coach and a psychologist. And I started this work because when I was trained in the field of psychology, I worked a lot with families, parents, couples, trauma survivors, all these things. And it was so rewarding. And I realized that this realm of family is so important. One of the things I always say is that in order to shift the consciousness of organizations and corporations and the government and all these things that we put so much time and energy in, you have to start by shifting the consciousness of families. Right? Like that's where it all begins. Any issue that you can point to in our society, this issue can go right back to the core of family and the type of experiences we've had, values we were taught, things that we believe. So I am so passionate about helping cycle breakers and what I like to call revolutionaries, people who want to evolve relationships. So I talk about relationship evolutionaries to really shift how they show up for themselves, for their kids, in their partnerships, because we find ourselves so stuck
Mhm.
in cycles that are unhelpful. And one thing that I talk about a lot is stable misery, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about today.
Yeah.
We find ourselves stuck there as well. So what I do is I have a program called Triggered to Transformed. It's a family coaching program for those who are, really dedicated to doing this work and shifting the consciousness of themselves and their family so that couples are excited to grow old together and kids actually want to visit home when they're older.
Oh my goodness, I love that.
Yes, that's all we really want when you think about it. It's like, I just kind of want to grow old with the person next to me. I don't want to just be there because, well, inertia,
Right.
why go anywhere now, right? So
Right.
I work with them in that group, and then I also work with couples one-on-one too.
Hmm. I love that so much. And, as I was telling you, being an entrepreneur is an invitation to do all of this personal development work because all of your stuff is going to come up no matter what. You can't hide from it. It's going to come up if you want to continue to grow and thrive in your business. So, this is so important. And how we do one thing is how we do all things. And how we operate in our family relationship and our personal relationships is how we operate in our business. So, doing this work is so important to helping you thrive as an entrepreneur and a mother, which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad you mentioned that because what we end up finding is that our business as entrepreneurs can very easily become like another kid, right?
Yeah.
Or one thing I talk a lot about in my work too, little tongue in cheek, is the business mistress cycle. Like, is your business your mistress, right? Is
Yeah.
it something that you are bringing in to help you deal or be a replacement for areas in your life and your family where you feel out of control? Where you feel like you are not as competent, where you feel you have cravings or needs that just aren't being met, right? So when we find ourselves in our life, in our personal life, with our family, with ourselves, feeling like we have these cravings or we lack control or we're just not as competent, like if you want to feel incompetent, become a parent. Do it. Just do it. It'll be great.
Right.
It'll be great. Because at some point, like I do this, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and
Yeah.
I throw me curveballs where I'm like, I got nothing.
right?
Like I got to think about this for a minute, right? So a lot of times what ends up happening as entrepreneurs is we're not used to feeling that way, right? Like we get out of, we feel out of control or we don't understand something in our business, we go hire a coach or we Google something or we read an article or we buy another book or something and then we get it and then we feel better, right? We feel good, like, oh, yay, I did it. I made this money or I finished that freebie or whatever it is in
Hmm.
ways that don't quite happen within our family. So our business can often we can often place it in a space in our lives and in our relationships where it allows us to feel more in control, more competent. It helps us to deal with the cravings or those unmet needs in ways that just feel good to us. But
Hmm.
the flip side of that is it often costs us what
Yeah,
really matters to us, which
right,
is our connection with our kids, our connection with our partner, our connection with
right,
ourselves when we treat it that way.
right. And I think that particularly with our families as opposed to our business, we kind of come into this mindset of complacency, or we just think it is how it is, or we can't change it, or, less and less it's taboo to ask for help. But I think, for me, we don't know what's possible, right? We don't know what getting help looks like, or um, how we can begin to make that transition. It's hard work, but the beautiful thing is there's people like you that can help people begin to kind of peel back the onion. So,
Yeah, I like
so
that.
yeah, I mean, that's what it's been like for me, coming from a very chaotic household where, I had a single mom most of the time and just lots of things happening. But I think a long time I lived in this stable misery, which you talk about. So tell us about that and how it impacts us.
Absolutely. So stable misery, it's a term that I've coined that resonates with so many people. I'm so excited to be able to define it because usually I
Yeah.
just say it and people are like, oh, and I'm like,
Yeah,
ah.
it's like this word, you hear it and you're like, dang.
Yeah, like that nails it. It's like nails my whole
Yeah.
life. So stable misery is a state that we find ourselves in. We're not in crisis, right?
Right.
It's like we're not dealing with death or financial issues or any of that. We're not in crisis, but we find ourselves feeling unfulfilled, unhappy, and unclear of how to move forward or how to get unstuck.
Hmm.
Okay. And it's a very I think it's very easy to look at stable misery as like an enemy, right? Like something we want to defeat. But in reality, it's actually in many ways a coping mechanism, right? Because it keeps us away from the unknown. It keeps us away from feeling out of control and like we can't do things. So it's a place where our world becomes very narrow.
Hmm.
We become very focused on handling things a certain way, even if that way doesn't bring us fulfillment. It might actually lead to misery, right? It's like we get it. And we find ourselves here, particularly in our parenting and in our partnerships,
Hmm.
100%. And I can describe what that looks like a little bit if that'll be helpful
Yeah,
to
I
you.
would love for you to get into like how we can recognize if somebody's like, I think I might be in this place.
Yes, exactly. So as parents, what I find it often looks like is like almost like parental burnout. That's how it
Right.
often manifests, right?
Hmm.
So they feel overwhelmed or exhausted, right? And just drained. And or in their relationship, like if they're partnered with somebody, it's like this constant feeling of not parenting on the same page,
Hmm.
especially with discipline methods. And you just kind of keep trugging along. It's like a horrible version of that Groundhog Day movie. Okay. Another thing that can happen is you find yourself in these constant argument cycles, whether it's with your parent or with your partner, excuse me, or with your child, where it's like no matter what I try, no matter how many books I read, how many DIY courses I take, no matter I keep responding and reacting in the same way, right? So they'll find themselves triggered a lot all the time, saying, I promised myself I wasn't going to do that thing that was done to me growing up, but I can't stop. I keep doing it. I try to do patience. I try to do the deep breaths. I do all the things. And then my child does that thing and I'm right back there again. So stable misery in parenting can also come along with a lot of recurrent guilt and shame, right? Um, Things that we normally do that might, under certain circumstances, bring us joy start to feel like a burden. So everyday routines, it's kind of like, oh my God, I can't. I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. Whether it be bedtime routine or dinner routine. And not that we should be like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs whistling while we work all the time with all those things. I mean, naturally, there are going to be times where those things don't bring us joy. But when we're stuck in stable misery, it's more often than not. Like we can't find joy in a lot of those areas. And then something you alluded to earlier in the parenting realm, I find with a lot of the parents I work with is there's almost this resignation. Like, well, this is just parenting. My goal, my job at this point is to just help my kids survive childhood until they grow up and leave the house. Right.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that being unfulfilled and unhappy as a parent or feeling like just kind of hopeless is just the way that it should be. It's just status
Yeah.
quo.
And I think related to that, and something now that I've done a lot of work that I kind of recognize is kind of like this automatic kind of snarkiness and negativity towards parenting. Like my husband and I, like we mentioned, we have a tween and teen daughter, and people are like, oh God, that's horrible. And we're like, not really. I
I
don't,
actually like these years.
what? We love our daughters. We're not trying to get away from them. And we're enjoying every minute, honestly, and just seeing them
Yeah.
grow and flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
So,
you're 100%. I see it too.
yeah.
And I think part of that comes from, again, this sense of trying to normalize the misery. It's like, let's
Yes.
normalize them up. Those are the teenage years. And yeah, the teenage years, I mean, it's funny. Every time my kids get older, because I have a tween and a teen as well at this point,
Hmm.
every stage they hit, I'm like, oh, I love this stage. And they hit another, oh, no, no, this is my favorite stage. And
Yeah.
now they're tween and teen. I'm like, this is my favorite stage. Like there's so many wonderful things that come along with this stage. Like they can talk back, and in some ways that's helpful, right? Because it's like when they're like little babies, they start crying and screaming, and you're like, I have no idea what's going on with you right now, right? But
Right.
now they can at
Exactly.
least tell you. May not always make sense, but or you may not always get it, but they can tell you, right? But I think when you are stuck in stable misery, there is this sense of how do I normalize where I am so that I can continue to function in this? Because if everything feels out of control and chaotic and there's no, it's kind of like Alice down the rabbit hole,
Hmm.
where there's no understanding of up is down and left is right. Like that
Hmm.
can feel very scary. And that's what
Hmm.
stable misery helps us to get away from. It helps us to get away from that sense of, I don't get any of this. I don't
Hmm.
understand any of this. So when we're like, oh, that's just the teenage years,
Right.
it's just going to be this way. There's
Hmm.
something about that normalizes it and makes
Yeah.
it familiar.
Yeah.
Now, caveat, I don't want to say that everybody's experience with teenage years should be hunky dory and wonderful. There is a
Yeah.
lot, every stage comes with its own dramas. I'm sure you would
Sure.
agree. Like, there's
Yeah.
always drama, there's always, but when we get in that stable misery pit, there's like this resignation around, like,
Yeah.
this is just how it will be. It cannot be any other way. And then we can
Hmm.
find ourselves falling into, oh God, what's it called? Confirmatory bias,
Hmm.
this psychological
Oh, yeah.
concept
Hmm.
where everything, like everything that confirms what we already believe is what we focus on. And
Hmm.
everything that disconfirms what we already believe, our brain ignores.
Right.
So when
Yeah.
your teen is doing that thing or is focusing or is
Uh-huh.
doing,
See, I told
that,
you.
yeah, exactly. Right. And then when they're like kind of off, it's like, I see you always, you
Hmm.
never.
Hmm.
Right. So
Hmm.
it's definitely something that another thing when we get into that snarky parenting realm,
Hmm.
it can be a protective factor. I get it. I get it. But I really want parents to hear like you don't have to parent in stable misery all the time, just like you don't have to partner in
Hmm.
stable misery all the time, which is a totally different dynamic, which I can go
Yeah.
into as well,
Yeah,
but
I
that
mean,
comes with its
I
own.
I was hoping that maybe you could give us a little glimpse into what that stable misery looks like in parenting or in our personal relationships. Yeah, we talked about
Yeah.
parenting. Yeah.
Yes. And in partnerships, what it often looks like, the biggest thing I often hear is um, we're living like roommates.
Mm.
Like we might as well just make sure that we come together to get the bills paid, make sure the rent's paid, maybe have a monthly meeting on
Hmm.
something. Did you wash the dishes? Right? There's no that deep connection. You go from soulmate to roommate, right? Like that deep connection that brought you together is no longer there.
Hmm.
A lot of the couples that I work with, they'll say we have the same arguments over and over and over again. And they'll try different things to try to deal with it, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, let's go to therapy. Oh, let's read this book. Oh, let's go to this weekend seminar. Oh, let's blah, blah, blah. Let's make a chart, try to figure it, blah, blah, blah out. And nothing seems to work. They keep falling back into the same cycles or the same
Hmm.
arguments. Or the flip side of that, they just avoid everything.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
let's just not talk about what's right. Like that elephant
Yeah.
that has like put 15 pounds of poop all over our living, we're just going to
Yeah.
ignore it and pretend
Yeah.
it's not even there. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And then this is another one that I see with a lot of entrepreneurs that I work with is your or professionals in general as well, but your relationship becomes hyper focused on kids and career.
Yeah.
Like that is mainly what you focus on. When you come together, like if something comes up against your child or your career, you all are like Wonder Twin powers activate. You, you will go and it's like there's energy and you can be on the same page with certain things and it's like "Rah, rah, rah." And then once
Uh-huh.
that's over, let's go right back.
Huh.
Right. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's actually subconsciously easier to create conflicts around the kids and the career. Let's go in a little bit deeper. But sometimes I think we subconsciously create things because it gives us something to connect over,
Hmm.
to feel something in the relationship around.
Right.
Um, and also the other big thing, which I focus a lot on triggers, is you find yourself being triggered by the same or reacting towards your child or your partner in ways that were modeled for you that you swore
Oh.
you would never do. When we're stuck in stable misery, it's so easy to just revert
Hmm.
back to the old stuff. And finding, especially in with couples, I'll hear them say like they can lay out exactly how the argument will go. No
Mm.
matter where
Oh
they
yeah.
start, they will
Hmm.
tell you exactly where it will end because at some point their brains will get hijacked and they will flip into those same cycles
Yeah.
that get them to those unhelpful places. And again, it might be where they're arguing and fighting, or it might be the flip side of that, where they just shut down and they just aren't
Right.
connecting anymore at all.
Yeah. So can you tell us how we got here and what if anything does intergenerational drama play in all of this? And then,
Yeah.
how can we start to emerge from this and begin to kind of see a different kind of life?
Mhm. So I love using the phrase, like a lot of people talk about intergenerational traumas now, right? And those are very important that we
Mm-hmm.
focus on those and understand those. But a lot of times, a lot of families I work with, not everybody experienced a trauma in their childhood. Like if I think about trauma as defined in the psychology realm in our diagnostic statistical manual, right, which is our Bible for giving diagnoses, a lot of people were not traumatized necessarily in their childhood um, by like a PTSD term, but we all have experienced some form of drama. And when I say drama, I'm talking about that like almost literally, like when you think about a play in a theater, right? And you think about people on stage, and it's like when you watch them, and it's like, oh, when this person leans in, that person pulls away. Oh, here comes the comic relief. Oh, and then when that, right? And you start to realize, like, oh, everybody has a role, everybody plays a role, everybody knows their script.
Mm-hmm.
right? And every family has different dramas or ways that we were taught, often in our childhood, to act out or play or be when certain scenes pop up. So it's like when an argument starts, we, based on our family dramas, we show up in a certain way,
You
right?
got the
When a
script.
conflict, or you're
You've
gonna say,
got the script.
right, you've got the script,
Yep.
you know the script, it is automatic in your head, right? You don't need to
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to read it or anything like
Yep.
that, right? And we learn how to do this in different things. How we have scripts about how to deal with our emotions, other people's emotions, how we view the world, how we view ourselves, um, values that we have around marriage and parenting, all types of things. We have these scripts, we have different dramas that we have lived through and that we have learned through, right, over the course of our lives. And when we fail to recognize these dramas, they're much easier to pass down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we don't question them. We don't even recognize them as such. Like, oh, this is something I've learned, I picked up on. Like before we came on, we were talking about spanking,
Mm-hmm.
and growing up, spanking was like, man, that was Tuesday, like it was,
Yeah.
of course you're going to get a spanking,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever. And I remember talking to my kids, or let me back up even before that. My kids love to tell this story. My daughter's out there, could probably have her come in and tell the story because she loves telling it. How before my son was born, because he's our first, um, my husband and I were talking to somebody and they asked us, which is, when you think about it, you're like, this is a really weird question to ask somebody before who's pregnant, but they did, like, are you going to spank your kids? And even as I say that, I'm like, this is such a weird question to have, but it felt very normal, and I think it is very normal. And it was like almost in unison. I said no, and Patrick said yes. And then we kind of looked at each other. And I said to him, oh, I wasn't aware you planned on having kids with someone else because you're not spanking mine. And he was like, okay, I guess we got to talk about this some more. And we had this really long conversation
Mm-hmm.
about spanking. And you could just see all of the values and the dramas and the scripts around what it means to not spank your child. Like if we don't spank this child, they will grow up and they will be in a juvenile detention center and they're going to be horrible and they're going to be disrespectful and they're not going to, like, it's all these scripts that I got too. I was raised with those too. I understood
Yeah.
them. But working in this field for quite a while by that point, I realized, like, this isn't making sense. Um, my biggest piece, and I promise I'm going to bring this back around, but my biggest, like, aha moment with spanking was before I even had kids. I worked in a juvenile detention center, and my ward, my unit, it was the short-term unit. So everybody in my unit, all the kids there, were only there between 30 and 90 days. And I was the counselor, and every kid that came in there, I had to interview every single kid, and there was questions that I had to ask them. And one of the questions was about corporal punishment and whether or not they were spanked or hit or any of that. Every single child except for two during my entire time there said that they were spanked or hit or something like that as a form of discipline growing up. So in my mind, I was like, but no, wait,
Yeah.
what the story is that you end
Mm-hmm.
up here when that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, and all of you kids are telling me, oh, get hit, get beat. Now, I'm not saying that if you spank your child, they're absolutely going to end up in a juvenile detention center. I didn't end up in one, but it really flew in the face of
Mm-hmm.
that belief, right? Which was a script that was handed down from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided, like, we're still married. So clearly we decided that we were not going to do corporal punishment with our kids. And the story that and the story I was talking with you about earlier was, just the other day, my daughter brought up the story again because she loves that story. And she said, you know what's interesting, Mom? Because you didn't spank us, we're not going to spank our kids. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, that is interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting. Right. And so realizing that you can question the dramas, you can start to look at, because you've lived them your whole life. You know what they look like, you know
Mhm.
what they sound like, and Triggered to Transform, we go through them very explicitly so
Mhm.
people can get super clear, because that is absolutely the first step. You got to identify, what are these traumas? What are these scripts?
Mhm.
And which ones do I want to hand down and which ones do I want to hold back?
Right. I
Mhm.
love that. I mean, I think awareness and just curiosity about what is going on in your life is so powerful. It's just like, what is happening? And what I kind of uncovered, kind of around quote unquote making your kids behave, is kind of many of us grew up in this environment where the kids or the children controlled the parent. They existed to control the parents' behavior or moderate the parents' behavior. It wasn't the parent going, okay, setting the tone and being the
Mm.
grown up in the room.
Yes. Yes. And I think, I talk about one of the things we have in Trigger to Transformed is this system where I created different home types.
Mm,
And it talks about the beliefs that these different home types have. And the fire home is around this, holds this belief that um, my kids will try to get one over on me. I have to discipline. I have to be in control, because if I'm not, if I don't, they will sit down and they will try to come up with a plan, a diabolical plan to control me or get over on me or manipulate me or run us
mhm,
over, or right. And so all of these views and beliefs that we hold are things that are going to lead us to be in relationship with others in a particular way,
mhm,
right? And it's the same with our partnerships, right?
mhm.
We hold beliefs
Yeah.
and ideas about what it means when our partner does A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Like, there are certain beliefs around that are going to impact how we show up. Patrick and I first got married, it came out all the time. Like, one of the things that is a big trigger for me is passive aggressive. I can't stand passive aggression.
Mm, yeah.
You want to turn me around and have me walk out the door, to bring passive aggression in. I can't
Yeah.
stand it. It drives me insane. And in Patrick's, that was often used. Like, it was the type of thing where it was like they could be on fire and they wouldn't scream. So, like, that was a way to get needs met. And so it would drive me insane. And very early in our relationship, we talked about it, we worked through it. But what ended up happening was, anytime he said something or did something, I was like, you're being passive aggressive. You're being right. And so it was like this script had gotten in my head that when he was not only was he being passive aggressive, but he was doing it to manipulate me, and so, and you can imagine the pleasant conversations that led to, night
Mhm.
after night after night, right? So,
Yeah.
one of the things that we can do, especially in our partnerships, is as we look at the different arguments that we're having,
Mhm.
okay, what are the things, like, what are the stories behind them, right? Like,
Mhm.
what's driving them? One of the things that all of my work is based on, I have this framework called the Paths Framework. And if anybody wants to know more about it, you can go to healingstableMisery.com and download it, and it'll show you how to walk through it and all of that. And I could talk about it a little bit here if it'll be helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll leave a link
But
to that in the show notes.
yeah, please do. And it really goes through 5 steps that we all have to take to truly transform our relationships, including one with ourselves, but
Yeah.
especially with our partners and our children. And the
Mhm.
P stands for perspective, and that is really about getting super clear. One of the things it's about is getting super clear on the stories we're telling
Yeah.
ourselves, about the other person that we're dealing with. Because if you can get clear on that and start to really lean into those, like, what am I telling myself about my kid in this moment? What am I telling myself about my partner in this moment? Be able to see, what am I telling myself about myself, right? You're
Yeah.
going to be able, that's where the awareness starts to come in,
Mhm.
and where you can start to make some major shifts
I love that.
in how you're moving forward.
That sounds really helpful and something we should all just kind of continue to revisit, honestly, even if you have, because we're sometimes we create new stories, just like you mentioned, about the passive aggressiveness or, just I guess I just have this perspective. I constantly try to live and examine life, like what's going on, what's happening, how can I make it better? So I love all of those tips, but I also want to make sure we get to another issue that comes up for listeners in that, you know, like you mentioned earlier, our business can become our
Mhm.
mistress. So can you talk more about how, if we're feeling like our business is consuming our lives and how we can have better harmony between our business and our families?
Yeah. I love that word harmony. I use that word a lot. Like, how do we get harmony in our homes? And especially with business, like we don't go into business because we hate what we're doing. We go into business because we genuinely love it or we feel like it serves a purpose or it just satisfies a need. And that's okay.
Mhm.
The idea
Mhm.
isn't to make even though our business can become a frenemy, right? Because it's a friend because it soothes a need or it leads us to feel confident or in control. It brings money into our home, all these different things. It can also be an enemy when it starts to serve the role of being that mistress and helps us to ignore the issues that are piling up that are actually creating the stable misery in our home. And we just ignore it and it just continues to pile up like elephant poop. So being able to find that harmony and that balance is super helpful. And there are three things that I often suggest to people to get started. The first thing is to create a vision for what you want your business and your life union to look like, right? Like what would ideally it look like? Because when we don't have a vision, right? Like I always say, in order to make any choice or move in any direction, we have to know two things. We have to know where we are and where we want to go. If you don't know where you are and where you want to go, like anywhere will do, you know? So starting out understanding like, okay, I have this business. What are the goals that I want to achieve in this business? I have this family, I have myself. What are things that are important there? And then creating a vision around that, and it could be as simple as what would a ideal day or week look like for me in my business? If everything were going exactly better than expected, right? How would I feel in my business and in my home, right? How
Mhm.
we feel is also part of that vision. Vision also fits into perspective. That's also a part of it, right? Like, how would I feel in my body? How would I feel emotionally if I had this harmony? So, getting super clear on what you want that union to look like. The other thing is create a family first plan, a family first plan. And I think a lot of times, especially if you read a lot of business books, you'll see like, okay, so write down, and I still do this actually, write down, what are 5 things you want to accomplish today? That's totally fine in your business. That's totally fine. But what would it look like, say on a Sunday night, to sit down and say, okay, what do I want my life with my family to look like this week? Right? Like I knew I was talking to you today. My daughter is out on the couch. I realized today that, okay, I'm going to have some time in the morning to do, some work, and then we're going to have this meeting. But what I did first was I sat down and I said, what do I want my day with my daughter to look like? What do I want that to look like? What are things I want us to get done? Right. And then I fill that in. And then I come behind it and say, okay, what all do I need to do? Or how does my day need to be structured so that I can create what I want with my daughter and my business? And my business becomes, instead of it being the head of the household, right? It's something that is an important part of the household, but it's not necessarily the leader all
Mhm.
the time, you know? And there are times, I want to say this, like if you're doing a launch or you have a big event that you're preparing for, there are going to be times where your business might need to take center stage.
Mhm.
It just might need to, and that's okay. prepare
Mhm.
for that, prepare your family for that. Like, hey guys, these next 3 weeks, I'm going to be head down, really focused. I just want you to know that. And then what that allows you to do, that allows your family to understand, oh, okay, I get it. So they're not like knock, 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 Sheldon or anything like that on your door. So they know what's happening, but it also gives you the opportunity to plan something fun afterwards. Like when I'm done with
Mhm.
these 3 weeks, why don't we fill in the blank, right? So it allows you to become super intentional.
Mhm.
So just experiment. Experiment is my favorite word in the English language, by the way. Experimenting with what would it look like to plan my family, to make a family plan first, whether it
Mhm.
be the day, the week, the month, and realizing it doesn't have to be super grand. Like, oh, I'm going to spend 5 hours with my kid every day this week. It could be something simple like when my kid comes home from school, I'm going to close the laptop or whatever. And for 5, 10 minutes, I'm just going to be there. I'm just going to be
Mhm.
present and maybe I'll ask them a couple of questions about things. And I'm going to set the clock for 10 minutes and I'm just going to be present in the room, ready and available and willing to be able to engage. And I mean, it could be something so small. It could be something around nighttime routine. It doesn't have to be huge, but making sure when you plan that family first, that often minimizes the guilt, right?
Mhm.
Or the resentment that our family can feel towards business.
Mhm.
Um, and then the third thing that I often tell it's a little bit deeper, right? Is around figuring out if you find yourself in that space where your business is your mistress, figuring out what need is it filling for me,
Mhm.
right? Like if I'm doing this or if I'm over functioning in my business because it allows me to feel competent, where in my family do I feel less confident and what can I do about that? If I'm over functioning in my business because it's the one place in my life where I feel like I have some control, right? Like where else in your life do you feel out of control and what can you do about that? Because what we know is when we ignore things, it doesn't really make them go away. They're going to
Mhm.
still be there when you turn around and you look, right? But they
Mhm.
might be bigger and they might be scarier and they might be more out of control. So figuring out what is the need that my business is filling for me, and what can I do on the
Mhm.
flip side of that to help me to feel more in control or more confident or competent, get my needs met in a more healthy way in the areas of my life that honestly do mean the most
Mhm.
to me,
I
you
love
know?
all those tips. And it's so interesting how revolutionary it can seem to somebody to say, how would you like your day to look like? How would you like your business to look like? How would you like your time with your family to look like? And another thing I would just like to add to that is that sometimes we think we know what our family wants to do with us, but our idea and their idea is totally different. So I think it's also important too to check in with your family and say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Because oftentimes we overcomplicate it and we make it way more intense than it needs to be.
Yes, so true. We just went on a family vacation.
Mhm.
And I swear, all the things that like well, it goes back to like, I would joke, when your kid's like a toddler and you spend all this money buying them this big electronic thing that beeps and dings, and all they want to do is play with the box,
Mhm.
right? And you're just like, "What is I mean, and the
Mhm.
family vacation we want, it surprises me every time the things that they say were the most impactful or that
Mhm.
they enjoyed the most. And
Mhm.
in that same vein, one of the things I often tell people too is ask your family to hold you accountable,
Mhm.
and check in with them, right? Like, hey, did you feel I do this with my kids all the time. And it's not for the faint of heart. It really isn't to ask questions like, did you feel like you got enough attention today? Right? Did you feel like are your needs being met?
Mhm.
Is there anything additional that any other way that we could connect? And sometimes there have been times where my kids have been like, nope, don't feel like I got enough attention today, mom. And I say it's not for the faint of the heart, because in the moment you're like, ouch, that
Yeah.
kind of hurt, and today is gone, right? But it allows you to be able to plan
Mhm.
differently. And also giving your partner and your kids the permission,
Mhm.
because if they don't have permission, they're not going to do it if they think it's going to lead to a fight. But giving them permission to say, "Hey, I think you're on your phone a lot,
Mhm.
or can you close the computer?" My daughter is like the queen of, "Mom, close the computer. Mom, put down the phone." Right? And so
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't ever remember giving her permission, but she doesn't mind taking it, and I'm
Yeah.
fine with it, right? But it's
Yeah.
like giving your family permission to hold
Mhm.
you accountable can be really helpful. We're so hyper focused right now on kids and screens, kids and screens. How do
Mhm.
we get our kids off screens?
Mhm.
And a lot of times when that happens, I'll ask the parent, "Well, what's your relationship with screens?"
Yes.
Like, really, like, because I
Touche.
know mine can use some work. So I'm just wondering, like, it's like sometimes I'm sitting and I just find the phone in my hand and I'm like, there's literally no reason for me to be on this, right? What in
Mhm.
my hand? How did it get here?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I
it can
love
be
that.
fun when you do that, when you're like, hold me accountable too, right? That's a
Yeah.
great, kids love that.
No, that's fantastic. And I think ultimately we want to raise kids that feel empowered and can voice an opinion, hopefully in a respectful way.
Mm,
But
that's the hope.
but in summary, I don't know, we've talked about so much and covered so many great topics, but what are some of the key mindset shifts that we can make as entrepreneurs to kind of break this cycle of you know, stable misery or
Mm.
whatever cycle we're finding ourselves in.
Yeah, one of the things that I often think, like, that I talk about with stable misery is a lot of times people think of it like a on-off switch, like a light switch. You're either in stable
Mm,
misery or you're not. And what that leads to is a sense of hopelessness and defeat. Because I have a lot of couples that will be like, "Oh my gosh, I heard you talk, or I read this thing that you did, and we're stuck in stable misery." And basically, it's like, I think our marriage will end, right? Because they're stuck in stable misery. And my thing is, don't think of it as an on-off switch. Think of it as a dimmer switch, right?
mm,
Where at the top, let's say the top is absolute joy, right? And the bottom is stable misery. Checking in and asking yourself, where are we on the spectrum, right?
mhm,
Like, are we closer to stable misery, or are we closer to joy? And if we're closer to joy or closer to stable misery, what can we do to move us even one little light, I don't even know what lumen level, I don't even know what you call
mhm,
them, towards joy, right? Because
mhm,
if the idea is, how do we climb out of the pit?
mhm,
I mean, that's a good question. Don't get me wrong. That's what
mhm,
couples come to me for. How do we climb out of the pit? I can help you climb out of the pit. But in the moment, it's, instead of how do we climb out of the pit, what is one small thing we can do right now, or in the next hour, or tomorrow, to bring us one step closer to joy, is a much more helpful question than,
mhm,
how do we climb out of this pit? It's
mhm.
like that feels exhausting and
Yeah.
overwhelming. So that would be my first thing, to look at stable misery not so much as an on-off switch, not as a death nail in your marriage, or in your relationship with your child, but think of it more as a dimmer switch, right? And
Mhm,
what is one small thing that you can do to move it a little bit closer to joy, that you can come to an agreement on? The second mindset shift I would make around, or I would suggest around, especially with a business mistress, is comes from Bronnie Ware. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but
mhm.
she's the one that wrote that book, The Five Regrets of the Dying. I think that's the name of the
Yep.
book.
Mhm,
Where one of them was, um, I wish I would have worked less. I wish I
mhm,
would have, spent more time with my family. I wish I would have cared less what people thought, all of those things. Nobody said, I wish I would have spent more time, writing that talk. I wish I would have spent more time creating that, freebie, or writing that report, or like, nobody says that. That's
mhm,
not, they say the exact opposite. Or I wish I had made 10K more, you know? And
Mhm.
so realizing that while you're just remembering that when it's all said and done, right? And we are like, that we're like checking out of this lifetime, really asking yourself, what will at that point I deem as more important, right? So
Mhm.
especially if you're finding yourself sort of trapped between like, oh, do I do this or I do that? Again, there's certain things in our business that need to get done. They just do.
Mhm.
But I would say a lot of times, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of stuff we spend our time on doesn't always need to get done, right? Or doesn't need to get done right now. So that's where that planning your family first comes in.
Mhm.
Planning your time with your family, planning your time with yourself comes first, because when it's all said and done, you are not gonna think about how I'm so glad I skipped my kid's game to finish that report. Like that's not gonna be a thing.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just remembering and asking yourself, when it's all said and done, which choice would I have been most excited that I made?
Mhm. I love
And
that.
which way of living my life would I feel really proud about so that I'm
Mhm.
not regretting,
Yeah.
and just making yourself aware of that and
Mhm.
those types of questions, and kind of using that when it's all said and done
Mhm.
mindset to really
Mhm.
help you make decisions. Like when it's all said and done, is creating this freebie for the eighth time really the most important use of my time in life?
Mhm.
Like really? Is it? Probably not. Right.
Yeah.
So those would be the biggest two, the dimmer switch and when it's all said and done. Right. And
I
using
love
those
that.
as sort of like a gauge.
Yeah, and two things came to mind when you were talking was one, from somebody who lived in stable misery for decades, I didn't realize that happiness or joy was something that you could cultivate. I thought it just
Mhm.
happened to you. And so anybody listening who might be thinking, well, happy family life or happy business family life is for others, it's something that you cultivate. It's something
Yeah.
that you intentionally work on through programs like this. So that is something that was such an aha for me. But two, as you were talking about the creating your harmony between your family and business, I think too we should stop creating this elusive idea of balance. Like it just doesn't exist. But to
Mhm.
just making sure that you're communicating those things with your family in a way that works for them and it's going to be solid for them. Like right now, I have a note on my door. If my daughters probably forgot that I told them that there is a podcast to remind them. It's like I have to do something that works for them. It's so,
Mhm.
so make sure that you're
Yeah.
communicating and examining your role in the situation that you're finding yourself in. And I think that that always is a good place to start. I
I
You
love that.
have
Mhm.
shared honestly life-changing tips today should somebody want to take on that assignment to better their life and better their family. And we're here as cycle breakers to just demonstrate and let you know that it's absolutely possible. So
Yeah.
given all of that, I know you've shared so much. If you wanted to leave a takeaway with listeners from our conversation, what would that be?
I mean, in addition to going to healingstablemissouri.com to download the paths framework, because you'll
Of
get a
course.
series of emails after that that'll tell you how to implement it. Um, one step at a time. One thing that I always say is you nor your family nor your marriage or are broken. You
Hmm.
just have habits that need to be.
Yeah.
You just have habits that need to be. And I work every day helping parents and couples break unhelpful habits that keep them stuck in these cycles. And
Hmm.
so real looking at it that way, as what if it's not me that's broken or my relationship or my child or
Hmm.
my partner? What if it's just we have some habits that need to be. There's something about that that's just so much more freeing
Mm-hmm.
because you can break a habit. Is it always the easiest?
Mm-hmm.
Nope. I should worked out this morning. That's my new
Right.
habit. I'm supposed to be doing. I didn't do it. Right. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to
Right.
make and break new habits, but it's a lot easier than if you think like, well, I'm just fundamentally broken.
Right.
Right. So shifting and realizing like you are not broken. You're not
Mm-hmm.
broken.
Mm,
It's just habits, scripts, cycles, things like
yeah.
that that need to be. And once you nail what those are,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier than you probably think to do so.
I love that because we're the first to beat ourselves up about whatever we think we might not be doing correctly, especially when it comes to parenting and our business. And so I love that and encourage listeners to just have a lot of grace with yourself and that you didn't get here overnight and you're not going to change it overnight.
Nope. Nope.
Because we do that too. We have that all or nothing mentality and think we're just gonna try a course or have one session and everything's gonna magically change, right?
Yes. Or read a book. Oh my God. I tell
Right?
people when they first start working with me, my first rule is please do not buy another freaking book for at least a month. Like you see all these books? Some of the
Right.
people I start working have more than me around
Right.
like parenting or their marriage. I'm like, stop with books are great. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, books are amazing.
Right.
But sometimes we use them in ways that lead us to, like you say, beat ourselves up because we're like, I just
Right.
read the book. Why am I not changing? So
Right.
yes, 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 yes. It's not
Yeah.
overnight, but it's possible.
Well, I had a guest who could shed a light on this and that buying a book or taking doing some of the things we've already done that aren't working is passive action. And really beginning to work with a coach is something that's really going to move the needle. And so I want to make sure listeners know where they can connect with you. I know we've mentioned a few things, but just highlight again where listeners can connect with you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, so healingstablemissouri.com is a great place to go. Also, if you're a parent and you want to get some insight on your triggers, going to mytriggerscore.com. There's a quiz there that you can take for that. Now, I will say a little caveat. Each of them comes with a series of emails. So I would suggest doing one and then other pick one to start with because I don't want you to get like 20 emails from me every day. So pick one or the other, but both of them has some really powerful tools that you can use, and it's a great way to start diving into because like you, being a coach, I'm all about moving you forward, getting you taking action. And
Mhm.
then once you start getting those emails, you can literally reply to any single one of them
Mhm.
and get access to me.
Mhm.
But I always love to start people with like the resources that are just available from me to you
Mhm.
because I want you to break free from the stable misery cycle, break these cycles that have been passed down in your family.
Mhm.
That is really, really what I want from you, for
I
you.
love I love that. And that's absolutely possible. And it's not gonna only improve your life and your family, but your business. There's just no way, no two ways about it.
Nope. No two ways about it for sure. Yes.
Yeah. I love it, Dr. Willis. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was excellent.
Thank you, Angela. This was so wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much.